Hello. This is to outline the topic of the seminar Applied Text Mining, which is held at the Bavarian School of Public Policy at the Technical University of Munich. This term, we devote ourselves to revealing biases in the United Nations. What you can see here is, well, it is not the United Nations, but it is rather a photograph of the deputies to the 13th National People's Congress at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, the capital of China. Can you spot any bias in here? Or let me put it a little differently. Would you have guessed from this picture that China's gender balance is roughly 51% men to 49% women? I'm not sure if I had guessed so. So, of course, this is a motivating example of bias, of the bias in perception. But first of all, semantically, bias is an unreasonably hostile feeling or opinion about a social group, which is often similar to prejudice of some form. But when it comes to perception of individuals, bias is more generally a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea, or, well, in favor of or against something. It can be innated, it can be learned, and people even may develop new biases for or against some things. And these some things, it is important to understand that these some things can be something concrete, like a thing, an individual, but they can also be something abstract, like an idea, like a belief, like a perception of a social group. And biases in the perception of policymakers, that is the dangerous thing, because their bias will lead to unfair decisions. So that's why we focus on revealing bias. And why the focus on the UN? Well, the United Nations aims at, among other things, protecting human rights. So ideally, or idealistically, there should be no bias of any sort in the mindset of the UN, right? To give you some context, the United Nations was built on the ruins of the League of Nations, and it began operations right after Second World War on the 24th of October 1945. The number of 51 founding member states has grown to 193 member states today. And the United Nations consists of 5 principal organs. The sixth one that you can see in the lower right corner here, the UN Trusteeship Council. It has suspended operations in 1994. But of the remaining 5 institutions, you might have heard before. I'm quite sure you have heard of the International Court of Justice, which is located in The Hague in the Netherlands. And from these organizations, the United Nations Security Council is surely the most visible of the United Nations institutions. The UNSC had its first meeting in January 1946. And the UNSC consists of 15 members, 5 of which are permanent and 10 are non-permanent members. The non-permanent members are elected on a regional basis to serve a term of 2 years. And the 5 permanent members, they go by the name P5. They are Russia, United Kingdom, France, China, and the USA. And the good thing is that the UNSC meetings are among the best reported regular activities of the United Nations. But first of all, the UNSC is surely a key body in the global security architecture. The Council meets on regular activities as well as on emerging crises. The example I selected here is a meeting on the situation in Afghanistan, which was held in 2017, for example. And in political science research, the UNSC has been an indicator or a monitor, a monitor of international power constellations and an indicator of geopolitical tensions. And now just imagine what biases might cause if they emerge here, or how bogged down a country's views are if they reveal a bias here in the UNSC meetings. But of course, the UNSC is not free from bias. They rather identified a tremendous bias in the past, which is the gender inequality, and addressed this in the famous resolution 1325, the resolution on women, peace and security. This resolution addresses the necessity, the importance of women's full and equal participation in conflict resolution, in peace building, peacekeeping, post-conflict reconstructions. This resolution also calls for special measures to protect women and girls from sexual violence. But it also outlines gender-related responsibilities of the United Nations in political and programmatic areas. And this, we will exploit this fact. But it is noteworthy that this resolution was adopted in late 2000, and prior to that there had been no explicit consideration of women's needs and roles in international policy making at the United Nations. But one key or one central component of achieving gender equality, one that is part of the overall goals of the resolution 1325, is gender mainstreaming. Of course, gender mainstreaming should help reach the overall goal of gender equality. And gender mainstreaming means that a gender perspective is applied in all policies and programs, so that analysis can be made of the effects on women and men respectively before any decision is taken. And there are different approaches to gender mainstreaming. One is the institutional perspective. That is the ways in which in which organizations implement mainstreaming policies. But the second approach is the one that is more interesting to us, at least, because it is the discursive perspective. And the discursive perspective of gender mainstreaming includes all ways in which official documents, official texts reproduce power relations through language and issue framing. So this means that gender mainstreaming has to start in formulating official documents. Gender mainstreaming manifests itself in language, if you will. So from these from these details, we can come to a possible research question in our seminar. For example, one possible question could be, how has gender bias manifested itself in the language of the UNSC debates, or on UNSC debates that are specifically focused on the women, peace and security agenda? Or you could even derive a detail from the first question, how does language pertaining to women in peace and security changes over time, changes throughout the history of the UNSC open debates. So you could measure, for example, do different terms emerge, in what contexts are certain words used, things like this. But of course, these are just examples. Of course, you may identify totally different types of biases. Remember, biases can be for or against something concrete or something abstract, like thoughts, opinions, social groups, and so on. But we want to focus on the United Nations, and more specifically on the United Nations Security Council, because there is a huge text corpus openly available, which covers all UNSC debates from 1995 to 2017. And there exists a corpus which, well, has these debates as single speeches ready as text files, as well as R datasets. So this dataset will help you in starting, or well, will spare you the process of collecting texts, of cleaning texts, of pre-processing texts to a certain extent, which might be very, very time consuming. And here we have something that we can work with already. There are two nice things about this. One thing is that this corpus is huge. It's 65,000 single speech documents. And the second nice aspect is that it covers a large time span from 1995, from the beginning of 1995 until the last meeting in 2017. And also 2018 and 19 will follow soon. So we have data available over a long period of time, and also in relation to many parts of the world, because you know that in the United Nations Security Council, representatives from all over the world come together, and we have this, or the dataset has these information readily available. So for every speech, you know, for example, the affiliation or country that the speaker or that the person represents. Okay, so to summarize this, your task will be to identify any form of bias in the United Nations in the United Nations, and we recommend you to focus on the United Nations Security Council, because there you have a large text body readily available, and we don't limit you in any way to what bias you have to reveal, but well, at least in this presentation we gave you some examples. Again, if there are any questions, don't hesitate to ask us. You have access to the Slack channel where we can interact, where we can talk about your ideas, and of course you can schedule meetings with your supervisors to refine your research questions, your research ideas, and talk about your ideas.